the Christmas edition of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Yes, you can indeed tell it is the Christmas edition because I have tree and I have sparkly deer, which making its once yearly appearance. So I think these kind of give the game away that it's the Christmas episode of the show, and I don't think I could cram in any more festive accoutrements if I tried. So anyway, before we look at today's lineup, I'd just like to say a big thank you to you guys for your support and continued viewing of my humble little show. Whether you've just started watching my episodes or whether you've been around as long as I have, and there's a few of you, it doesn't matter. I just appreciate you viewing, watching the episodes, commenting, all that kind of stuff, and hopefully we'll carry on doing some interesting stuff next year. And yeah, so like I said, a really big thank you to everyone. So as tradition dictates, tradition coming at me from last week, tradition dictates that obviously the Christmas episode of the show is something a little bit special, and I think today's episode of the show is a little bit special. The only downside to today's episode of the show is that as far as I'm aware, none of these bottles are commercially available, which is a bit of a downer, so you're just going to have to put up with me reviewing them, I'm afraid. And well, all these samples come courtesy of a good friend and customer of mine, Ian Sunderland, so big thank you to Ian for the samples for today's episode of the show. A really generous guy, it has to be said. I mean, you know, whenever he comes into the shop, which isn't that often, he's always bringing stuff for me to try and say, oh, you got to try this, you got to taste that. I mean, even turns up to the Whisky fair in Nottingham with stuff for me to try, and it's going, have you got a sample of this? And I'm going, yeah, I've got one of those, never tasted that one, can't really do it now, haven't got any sample bottles. Oh, look, I've got a sample bottle. I mean, who does that sort of thing, you know? Anyway, so Ian, cheers mate, thank you. That is, your generosity is really appreciated, and hopefully you'll like my review of what you left me to sample. So anyway, that I think is enough waffle. Let's look at today's interesting lineup. Okay, so to be honest with you, this was the one sample that I really wanted to taste, and this was, I knew Ian had some of this, had a bottle of this, and this is where it all kind of started. So this is the Triple Distilled Kilkerran that was bottled for Dram Busters. It was distilled in April of 2006 and bottled in March of this year, thus making it 12 years old, aged in American oak and bottled at 60.4%. So starting off with a nice light one then, as per usual. I don't think there was very many bottles actually done, so if you happen to get hold of one or still have one or what have you, then well, good on you. The next bottling we'll be looking at is a cage bottling, and again I don't get the opportunity to taste the cage bottlings very often, and I think as this is a Hazelburn, I think, you know, looking at the two triple distilled spirits is going to be quite interesting. Yes, I know they're obviously different distilleries and different setups and what have you, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to compare the two. So this particular one, Hazelburn, was distilled in December of 2007, bottled in May of this year, thus making it 11 years old. It's a fresh bourbon barrel, or could be a hoggy, I don't honestly know, I just know it's fresh bourbon, and bottled 57.4, warehouse number 6, rotation 961, for those of you that like to know these things, and I imagine there's probably a few of you out there that probably got that particular bottling as well. Right, now we're going to move on to two very special Springbank bottlings. As you can see from the title page, these are indeed private cask bottlings, so or not as the case may be, because this one hasn't actually been bottled, or as far as I'm aware it hasn't actually been bottled. So I'm hoping maybe whoever owns this particular one, and maybe if they watch it, this might actually make them decide whether to bottle it or not. Anyway, so I don't know who owns it, but it's a 17-year-old, distilled in November of 2000. The sample was drawn in April of last year, and at that time it was 47.7%. It's a fresh sherry cask, I would imagine a butt, number 647. So like I said, I don't know who actually owns that particular cask. Ian didn't actually say. Now, then the second of the two private cask bottlings is this one. It's a 25-year-old, which has been bottled. It was bottled for somebody by the name of Alex J. Briggs. I don't know him, and hopefully this was a good cask, but obviously we shall find out. So this was distilled in 1990, bottled in 2015, cask number 1990/138, judging by the colour of it, probably American oak, bottled at 47.9. And finally, we'll saving a bit of peat till last. This is the Society Longrow bottling. It was distilled in 2007, November 2007, bottled in March of this year, thus making it 11 years old, from a refill recharred sherry butt, and bottled at 56.9%. And, well, not as dark as you might expect from something like that, but I'm guessing that obviously the recharring has obviously removed some of the coloration, because obviously you can see from this one, this the 17-year-old, which is a sherry butt, you can obviously see the colour. So anyway, that's today's lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of triple distilled Kilkerran then. Okay, so let's see what Kilkerran gives us then, shall we? Lovely aromatic honeysuckle, hyacinth, barley, lovely sweet barley, but balanced by a lovely saltiness. There's a touch of toffee, creamy vanilla. You know what, there's an element of Bruichladdich about this, it has to be said, with that sort of hyacinthy kind of character, and honeysuckle. There's a touch of dried fruit. It feels a little older maybe than 12, but like the Hazelburn, it's got a lovely density. We're not talking a light effete whisky here. This has actually got some guts. It's got some maltiness, some density, some weight to it, and it's certainly not spirity either. This is just a lovely, absolutely lovely nose. Really, very, very intriguing. Let's see what the palate's like. Light, soft, less fragrant. There's less of the sort of florally kind of notes and more barley, earthy barley. The finish is a bit short because obviously the alcohol is masking that. There's some dried fruits, not quite as much oak as I was expecting. Just there was quite a bit of creaminess and quite a bit of vanilla on the nose. I mean, it certainly wasn't unbalanced, but I was expecting a little bit more oak. But a little bit of spice on the finish, touch of apricot. I mean, it's just a lovely spirit. I mean, and it has a real weight and depth for a triple distilled spirit, has to be said. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Now that's more lighter. more saltier, almost citric, but not quite. We're starting to move towards that sort of lighter citricy kind of notes, but the reality is that the emphasis has now kind of really shifted towards the barley. It's got a wonderful, natural, pure barley kind of character now. Oak has lessened as well a little bit, so again it's kind of giving all this kind of barley character free rein. There's a little bit of wood spice, a little bit of almost rye-like spices coming from the American oak. But that is just absolutely delightful. And again, like I said, it's got so much robust character for a triple distilled spirit. It is just really quite remarkable. See what that's like now. More obvious, triple distilled, dried fruit. Again, emphasis is quite firmly on the barley notes. Again, wonderful purity of barley, a little bit of salt. Again, sort of no real oak at all. The oak just seems to have sort of like, yeah, you can kind of sense the oak adding to the structure of the whiskey rather than tasting the actual vanillins themselves. Lightly oiled, dried fruit kind of coming back on the aftertaste. I mean, that is just a fantastic spirit. I mean, you know, it's obvious that Kilkerran can cope with being triple distilled. I wonder if they're ever going to try quadruple distilled, you know, do a Brookladdy, because like I said, I mean, although it doesn't taste like Brookladdy, I've just got this kind of intimation, this sort of, you know, maybe it was because the slight floral character, that's sort of like the hyacinth and the honeysuckle on the nose when it was neat. But either way, I mean, that is just bloody good. Right, okay, so alcohol decreases very slightly on the next bottling. So this is the 11-year-old Hazelburn fresh bourbon. Let's see what the nose gives us. Quite alcoholic, more fishy, oily barley, touch of white fruit, lemon, less of the dried fruits, less of that sort of almost column stilly kind of dried fruits. Again, it's got a great weight to it and a more heavy, oilier character. Again, quite fishy. It's a touch closed, it's a touch sort of tight, it's a little bit of almost tobacco leaf, and a touch of raw barley as well. Again, just, you know, I think Hazelburn is a very underrated spirit, and I really like it. Again, it's kind of like, just got all that kind of, you know, fishy, oily, Springbank kind of character, you know. See what that's like. Soft, oily, really malty. I mean, it has a really dark malty finish to it, and like I said, for a triple distilled spirit, it has so much weight and intensity. Again, fishy, briny, a little bit of citrus, plenty of barley again, a little bit of spice and vanilla on the finish. Stunning, absolutely amazing spirit. I mean, like I said, I really like Hazelburn. Let's pop a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Less oily now, more lemon citrus. It's got a sort of creamy lemon kind of note, almost sort of lemon meringue pie filling, or sort of lemon curdy. but not quite so sort of like thick as maybe lemon curd. So sort of kind of lemon curd-ish, if you see what I mean. Less oak again, but it's got a nice spiciness and a little grippy tannin. I mean, for fresh bourbon, I was expecting a lot more vanilla, a lot more American oak character, and the reality is that there's not a huge amount of American oak character at all. The spirit is just right front and centre. I mean, the oak is so subtle. Like I said, it's giving a nice kind of structure, but not a lot else. See what that's like. Still quite weighty, still quite malty, softer, longer, obviously just knocking off the alcohol has lengthened it. Again, a little more citric, touch more white fruit, lemon, grippy, slightly gritty tannins, fish oils, but again, not a huge amount of vanilla at all. And you know, I would not have put that as a fresh bourbon cask. It certainly just doesn't say fresh bourbon to me whatsoever. But you know, it's still absolutely gorgeous. You know, and not having huge amounts of oak characters just again allowed the spirit character to show through nicely. And when you've got a lovely complex spirit, you don't need buckets of oak. Right, okay, so let's move on to the technically 17-year-old private cask. So fresh sherry butt. See what those goes. Ooh, yes, lots of sherry. Prune, walnut, date, malt, sweet dried raisinated fruits. Yeah, that actually smells a lot older than 17. It's developing that lovely kind of darker cognac-y, dried, appley, raisiny kind of sherry character. Touch of coffee, cinnamon, clove, pepper. Oh, it's just evolving. It's just sort of opening up absolutely wonderfully. I mean, little bit of fishiness, a little bit of smoke. I mean, yes, it's a sherry monster, and yes, the emphasis is definitely on the cask. But I'll tell you what, that really does smell a lot older than 17. And you know, I mean, obviously I've not tasted it yet, but just from the nose and the fact that the ABV has fallen to 47.7, you know, we're heading south pretty quick. If this hasn't been bottled, I would consider bottling it as soon as possible, really. Even if the alcohol wasn't falling that far, it's in a lovely place. And you know, if you like, obviously, whoever bought the cask obviously likes, you know, Sherry Monster Springbank, so ticks all those boxes anyway. Let's see what that's like. Elegant, cognac-y, delicate, dried fruits, dried apple, raisins, prune, walnut, ginger, treacle, touch of tar, violets, salt, fish. I mean, it just ticks all the boxes of a sherried Springbank at the end of the day. Really nicely balanced, some soft tannins, little grittiness right at the edge, so you know, just to remind you, it is Springbank and not something like Macallan or one of the more polished sherry monsters. Coffee, dark chocolate. Yeah, bottle this now, mate. I mean, you know, I really think that you don't want to let the alcohol sort of like drop off too much further, because it's just balanced, absolutely perfectly, in my personal opinion. So, you know, if the owner of said cask is indeed watching, you know, like I said, mate, bottle it soon. Right, okay, so moving on to the 25-year-old. So this is a bottle of 47.9. See what those give us. Oh, mother, that's gorgeous. Sorry, excuse me. Just having a moment there. Not quite a when Harry met Sally moment, but close. Light, delicate, airy, cognac-y. Fish oils, brine, sweet barley, grippy but sweet American oak, vanilla, honey, cinnamon, touch of toffee. I mean, that's just, I mean, that's just so beautifully balanced. You've just got that cognac-y baked apple, the fish oils, the soft vanillins, the slightly grittier tannins. Oh yeah. Now, I mean, I know there's a lot of you that love old sherried Springbank, but you know, that old American oaks Springbank just does it for me all the time. Absolutely gorgeous. See what that's like. Touch more oak on the palate, a bit more creaminess. I love that sort of old violety note that comes through, which I often find on Springbank and Bamore as well. Although it doesn't quite have the sort of slightly dusty Palmer violety kind of character. It's more fresh violet. Touch of spice, again, barley, brine, fish oils, little bit of smoke, just a thin thread. Cognac-y, dried apple, apricot, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of tight tannin, wonderfully long and slightly spicy. I mean, touch of grilled nuts. I mean, that is just absolutely stunning, and just goes to show that how damn good old Springbank can be when just left to get on with it in American oak, and that is just perfection as far as I'm concerned. Well, Springbank perfection, I should say. Right, and finally on to the Society Longrow. So this is a refill, recharred sherry butt. See what that gives us. Intensely fishy, briny, earthy, real astringent coastal peat, lemon, apricot, chocolate, charred oak. Obviously I'm getting a lot of charred oak, subtle dried fruits. It has to be said again, the sherry influence is not huge, and as you can tell from the colour of it, I wasn't expecting a huge amount of sort of sherry dried fruit and stuff like that. I mean, it has a sort of, it comes across more like a refilled sherry, quite a well refilled sherry, which in essence I suppose you could probably say it is, as it's been stripped out and recharred. Yeah, you're definitely getting that sort of like charred oak character coming through, but it works really nicely, melding in with the sort of like the peat and the coastal notes. It's got a wild edge, but it's also quite civilised as well for a Longrow, which is pretty amazing really, considering some Longrows can be pretty wild and woolly. This one just about, it's got a really nice balance between the two extremes, I think. Let's see what that's like. A lot more sherry on the palate in actual fact. Dark dried fruits, treacle, toffee, coffee, bitter burnt wood notes right on the aftertaste. Good dollop of earthy peat, some brine, sherry spices, tannins, alcohol. Yeah, I mean, all told, actually pretty well balanced. I think it all kind of works in. It's got a little bit of a wildness to it, but it's also got a little bit of civility as well, which I think marks that out as a pretty damn good Longrow. Let's put a little drop of water with it. Also a little bit of violetiness as well on the aftertaste. Right, okay, see what nose gives us now then, shall we? Lighter, a little bit more sherry character now, but again still feels like a refill sherry cask. A little less peat, a little more barley. Touch of violets coming out now with some honeysuckle as well. Brine, fish oils, yeah, I mean, I think I personally prefer the nose neat, but either way it's still really quite impressive. Let's see what the bass like now. Less peat, less sherry, more barley, lighter, more fishy, more oily, more briny. Again, subtly spiced, violety, coastal, but robust and full. Either way, I think actually with or without water, that's really quite an impressive bottling, it has to be said. I think maybe I kind of like the slightly more wildness of it without water, but like I said, either way, I thought that was that's a very, very good Longrow. Okay, so that's sum today's episode of the show. Just like to say again, Ian, thank you, mate, for the samples for today's episode of the show. Really appreciated that. I think it's been a blast, as they say, and I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to me waffling on about them, even though you can't actually get your hands on them. So the triple distilled Kilkerran, yep. Well, I didn't expect it to be bad. I've not tasted a bad Kilkerran, it has to be said. Okay, so the heavily peated bottlings are a touch on the young side, it has to be said. And if it was me personally, I probably wouldn't have released them just yet, but I guess there's always pressures on distilleries to release things. I think, yeah, give it a couple more years, maybe another year, maybe. Just, it's still got that slight faintiness, which, you know, I think just needs a bit more time in the cask. The Hazelburn cage bottling, yeah, absolutely gorgeous. No issues with that whatsoever. Really like Hazelburn. I really think it's underrated, and I must admit, when people say they like Auchentoshan and, dare I say it, Glenkinchie, you know, I will kind of shuffle them in the direction of Hazelburn, because I'm saying, look, you know, you're on safe triple distilled territory, but you're just getting a little bit more interesting spirit. Not to say that Auchentoshan isn't interesting, it can be. You probably can't quite say the same about Glenkinchie. Anyway, moving on to the first of the two privately bottled Springbanks, the sherry matured 17-year-old. Like I said, if you own this particular cask, I really think you ought to bottle it, or if you don't own it, and grant you're watching this episode of the show, bottle the bloody thing, for God's sake. Do not let that slip too much further, because it will be a real shame, even if the guy doesn't sort of want to buy it straight away, or, well, he probably was already bought the cask, so you're not going to lose out on anything, but I would really just get that out of the cask before it goes too much further south. Mr. Briggs, you had a gorgeous cask. You bought a beautiful cask of Springbank, it has to be said, and that was absolutely gorgeous. And if any of you have had the opportunity to taste that, well, you were indeed in for a delight. And finally, the Society Longrow. Yeah, I mean, you know, you expect, I suppose, a little bit of sort of. You know what I feel about recharred casks. They can make the oak feel kind of a little forced, a little sort of unnatural in character. And yes, you could taste the charred cask, which I suppose is part of the reasoning for doing it. And it did give a little bit of a bitterness, but not too much. But it kind of worked in with the sort of like the peat and the coastal notes. And this is the thing with Springbank and Longrow and the associated bottlings. They just have this complexity that really can deal with oak amazingly well. And all these sort of characters work together. So which is one of the reasons why I think sort of Springbank is definitely an A-rated distillery, A plus. I think even with some of the more iffy bottlings that have come out over the years, you can't argue that their bottlings are not entertaining and well, definitely fun. So anyway, that's the Christmas episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed all the episodes that I've done over the course of the last 12 months, and hopefully I'll see you on the other side of the mad period. Anyway, so all that's left to say is good dramming and Merry Christmas.